Hello and welcome to the Oracular Live Q&A. It's more of an Oracular Live. I'm going to do this like a regular psychic medium reading, and I'm just going to flow with what I'm picking up and what I've been dreaming about for the past a long time, and it's been a long time coming doing this live with a lot of dreams and whatnot, and having to change the date and the spiritual realms wanting it done a very specific way. So let's get into it. So first, before I delve into what information I have, I'm going to say that what I pick up and sort of what I relay, a lot of other people will pick up as well and start thinking about and start intuiting or start feeling it. So a lot of the times what I'm picking up and what I'm dreaming about, it's already sort of happening in the collective energies. And so if you it's sort of like just reconfirming your own energy and your intuition about what's going on, and a bit of a clarification and a confirmation about what you've been feeling and you've been picking up. So it's really important to remember that we all have the ability to use our intuition to guide ourselves through collective chaos and upheaval, which really just means changing into something more healthier. Okay, so yes, all right. So I've broken this up into three parts. We've got the racism, the Holocaust, and the scapegoating, which is collective. And I'm going to talk about past lives and that. And then I'm going to go into another topic, the trade wars, fair trade, Canada, China, and time to sharpen your survival skills. And I'm going to talk a little bit about manifestation, speeding up, and creative thinking and whatnot. So actually, I'm going to go, okay, I'm being guided. I'm going straight into the trade wars. And I'm going to talk about the great grand cosmic reset that's taking place and begun and energies build right back from when China and the World War and whatnot and stuff that has been building. So I think what's going to happen and what I'm feeling here is that the collective energies are going to bring on the idea of a World War III. But from the higher perspective, it's going to feel like another world war. It's going to be, the energies are going to feel very abrupt, and there may be a little bit of violence, and there may be a lot of upheaval. But the thing is, things need to break down and change before they can evolve into something new. We cannot move past racism and a failing trade war, if I may add. And yes, we cannot evolve into something more substantial and heartier and more supportive for our earth without first having the breakthrough and breakdown of something that really isn't serving us anymore. So when these collective energies start ramping up and there's all this talk of World War III, this energy is already here. You know, we've got all these talks of the Holocaust that are coming up. There's a lot of stuff on racism. There's a very extreme energies that are playing out, and they're not an accurate representation of what is actually happening and what is actually taking place. And I think sometimes what happens is we almost get tricked or fooled into believing that things are happening a very certain way when they're not. And that's when you are experiencing something in the earthly realm a very certain way and from a very certain perspective, and you can't move past it and see it as anything else or anything other. And so that's what happens when you get collective racism, is that you stay stuck in this very coercive consciousness that is trying to dictate, dominate, and control you and make you think and feel a certain way. So with something like the Holocaust, or the energies of group racism and group think, there's a lot of collective scapegoating that happens where you could be feeling great and positive about your life, and then someone comes along, say you are a darker skin tone and it doesn't really matter to you, you feel fine, and then someone of the same skin tone comes and tells you, we need to fight for this. We need to stand up. We need to do X, Y, Z, but you're not feeling that. And what happens is there's this group mentality that happens, right? And people start to tune into it. And this is how you get massive groups of people almost collaborating in this one group of violence, very extremist, coercive, us against them, black and white thinking. And it's almost like the energies are being manipulated into trying to move you or coerce you into thinking that certain things are happening when they're not. So you have to be very mindful. And this is when very large amounts of energy gets harnessed or moved and makes these massive things in our consciousness and our awareness, and they feel very heavy and very violent. And it's a very extreme state of consciousness, something like the Holocaust and racism that's coming up. I remember reading a bit of a book, and just if you have had and stuff that was coming through to me, and as I was dreaming of it, is that if you're not feeling connected to maybe the racist storyline that's playing out, you needn't be a part of it. And it's very important to be mindful to step back and step away from group consciousness or group think that's trying to coerce you or manipulate you into feeling and thinking and knowing the world in a very certain way. And so we saw a lot of that around the vaccine and what happened on the mainstream world news with the I don't know if I should say it with the vaccine and this black and white thinking that plays out, and we all went through it. We all went through it, and we all had our initiations, and we all experienced that in a very vastly different way. And what happened was there seemed to be this main group that went very black and white. You're either vaccinated or you're not, and this is how it is. And there was no middle ground or leeway. So with that divisive, coercive consciousness, which is what the racism energies and the things like the Holocaust are created from, there is a very black and white stance on it. And so it's very mindful that you learn to, and if you don't cooperate with these energies, they get very, very violent. And that's not a state of consciousness that you need to be involved in right now. If you see it playing out in front of you, it's very important. You can get wrapped up in it. You can get caught up in it. You can start playing, this is where scapegoating happens. You can start playing a role for someone that's very, very negative, and they just start playing things out of you and pull you into their state of knowing the world when you're not experiencing that. So it's very, very important to have boundaries and whatnot with things like that. And the reason why, and it is, I don't know how to describe it other than the fact with something like the Holocaust or racism that comes up, is that energy gets harnessed. And there's very dark and negative energies behind it. And if you've had past lives and I was dreaming of someone in particular in New Zealand here, very, very particular, who was sort of exonerating racism and that the Maori were downtrodden and Pakeha took all the land. But when I was looking at his energies, there's a lot of stuff that plays out in New Zealand. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the land masses as well, where there has been stuff that's happened in the past. So, for instance, here in New Zealand, there's a lot of history of racism, and there's a lot of history of Pakeha versus Maori, and there's a lot of stuff that came up about the Waitangi tribunal and what the last few years, especially around the vaccine and the three waters that came up. And a lot of the times when people have had past lives in very similar roles or very similar essences or consciousness, they're going to resonate with those storylines. So I was looking at someone in particular I was dreaming about. I won't name him. And he was sort of the leader of this grouping of people almost that were resonating with his frequency. And he was very, very divisive, but also very immature and juvenile. And I looked and I was like, a lot of people that would resonate with him would lack discernment and be able to think for themselves. Because there'll been a lot of stuff come through about thinking for yourself and sheep mentality and group consciousness. And that when you are unable to think for yourself, you need other people to tell you what's going on, and you can't step out of that group consciousness and you just go along with what everyone else is saying and everyone else is thinking, and you can't step out from the circle. And you're just, when you see these big groups of people saying they're downtrodden, they're all resonating with something inside of them that's already downtrodden, and maybe they've had past lives where they've been super racist, and now they're experiencing the other side of the coin. In particular, the person I was dreaming about, there were past lives involved with the Ku Klux Klan and being very, very divisive and having slaves and whatnot. So it's very important to remember, if someone is in that state of consciousness, they've most likely done it before and they're resonating with that energy because it's already within them. So that's why skin color doesn't really matter. It means more so about the frequency and the energy that you're embodying when it comes to racism. And you have to be very, very careful with scapegoating here. And if you're not feeling downtrodden and then someone else tries to convince you that you're downtrodden because you're a certain skin color, but you're not feeling that, step away and step out from it. I know that can happen in family dynamics. And you're not feeling it, you're feeling fine, you don't want to be a part of it, you feel happy and healthy. It can happen out in communities and whatnot. And yeah, that's a very important thing to remember with something, and it is a consciousness or an energy that you can tune into and become a part of if you're negative and heavy enough in your energy. And that is called dinosaur consciousness, where there's not a lot of light, there's not a lot of life force, there's not a lot of a strong connection to the spiritual realms and the cosmos. You're very, very dense, you're very, very low, and it's sort of like experiencing Earth in a very one-dimensional state. So yeah, and usually when I've seen like these ringleaders, and I've just been observing stuff that online and whatnot, the energy is not healthy in their face, in their auras. There's a lot of heaviness. There's very little light. And I know, yeah. Okay, moving on from that one. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go into, okay, we're going into Wuhan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Wuhan and China and the state of affairs and the trade wars. And let me tell you, okay, so there's a lot of stuff that's going on in media about the idea of World War III and the trade wars and whatnot. But if we look at it from a higher, more healthier perspective, the way that the trades are run is not healthy or supportive to anyone. And I'm just going to say, a lot of people are going to be shit out of luck. Excuse my language, here in New Zealand with the meat transport and whatnot and the farming, because a lot of that was built on greed. And if I do heaps and heaps of farming, I'll send all my meat export overseas and get heaps of money. And so there's a lot of stuff here where it's very archaic and it's very dinosaur, and the animals aren't treated right. It's all about money. The land isn't treated right. It's not healthy. It's not fair. It's not fair on anyone. And there seems to be very little profit for anyone else outside of those trade lines and trade, you know. And I just saw some things, and I've been doing about some things the past few years. I've been talking to I talked to a few other clairvoyants every now and then, and there was a lot of similar themes of droughts happening in China. And I think there's already been a few droughts and a lot of droughts in Southeast Asia and in Asia in general, and that's where all their crops are. And I do really feel like, and China, the giant of China, has been through a lot of chaos ever since the vaccine and the lockdowns. And I do really feel like the Republic of China, and I'm not speaking for people of China directly, but this is just common sense. I do really feel like the people of China have had enough, and they're not behind this trade war thing. They're probably, there's just been stuff that I've seen where people are already struggling with food over there. China has stopped certain trades with Australia, like grains. There's food shortages already happening in China, and it is a breakdown of something that is just not working and cannot continue any longer. And it's like and if you just look at China and the consciousness of China and what it has stand for in the past, and these world wars, and going into other Asian countries and taking them over and whatnot, like Tibet, I think. The world leaders and the conscience of China, they have a history of using violence and whatnot to get what they want. But it doesn't matter what media says, you have to use your intuition, your common sense, that if China are already struggling, the people have had enough. No one's really behind this World War III and the trade wars, but it's going to be made and blown up into this extravagant thing. And it's just not that. It's just not what's happening. Um, yeah, and it is, and just because I seem to be watching it from afar, and I was just thinking, but the Chinese have shot themselves in the foot because they actually need the food from Australia to feed their people and to feed the people in war. The people that are going to come into the other countries, they're not behind this war, and it's not. It's going to be so impasse or so half done. But the media is going to make it into something, like fear mongering more than it actually is. And there is going to be a little bit of violence. There is going to be a little bit of chaos, but it's all to do with how you navigate it and work with it and use your and trust in your gut and your intuition. Um, yeah, okay. So, and I really feel like China, and it was just really interesting because I've seen a lot of other spiritualists talk about the year 2032. And I just saw on one of the trade world maps that everything was going to be redesigned on the trade war lines by 2032. So it's changing, and it's sort of like the world is changing, but China doesn't. China's still operating from this chaotic consciousness, but no one's really on board with it. Um, and we just like a little bit tired of it, to be honest. And I do really feel like Canada is going to step in and become the next China, but from a higher, more stable consciousness. So there's going to be a rerouting of who's boss. It's going to be spread out more easier. It's going to be more peaceful. But at first, we need to experience the chaotic breakdown of China and these trade wars, because I can tell you right now, China needs that food from Australia. They cannot survive. When I saw that happen, I was like, no, you need that food from Australia. Your people need it. Your soldiers need it. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself off your own land because there's flooding and crops and storms, and there's more coming that are going to shut you down. Okay, now I'm going to go into the topic of time to sharpen your survival skills. Yes, time to sharpen your survival skills. So, what I mean by that and why that is the theme is because there is going to be food shortages, and there's going to be times here in New Zealand and Australia and elsewhere where there's going to be no food in the supermarket, or there will be rations. This is what I mean. It's going to feel like we're going back to World War II, but it's going to be, oh my God, it's World War III. But because, if you've had past lives and very scarcity in your past life, scarcity tactics, can you be mindful of scarcity tactics from online, please? Because it's not an accurate representation of what's happening. And you know how in New Zealand here, there's something that happened with the toilet paper around the lockdowns and whatnot, and people went berserk over the toilet paper. It was like, I need to buy toilet paper because it's going to run out. That's a scarcity tactic where you just get so overcome with fear, and you take everything for yourself, and it's just so inaccurate of what's actually happening. It's a little bit weird. It's not weird, but it's just a little bit, okay, you need to take a break. Scarcity tactics. So time to sharpen your survival skills. Yeah, so obviously there's going to be breaks in the supermarket where the supermarkets aren't going to have food to feed us, or there's going to be rations or very, very low amounts of food in those supermarkets. And it's very, very good in February, March, April, May, June, July of next year. Please start building your food shortage supplies, as in make sure you have enough for at least a few days. 3, 4, 5, 3, 3, 3. Make sure you are able to feed yourself for 3 days, because it feels like that food is going to come in dribbles and drabs. And I also know there's pirates. Someone's been saying about pirates in other parts of the trade wars, and that ships were getting taken over and whatnot, and stuff wasn't arriving. So there's a lot of other stuff going on. And the best thing you can do is, if you find yourself in a pickle with very little food until the next shipment comes in, is to not freak out. You may have a few days where you are only eating 2 meals a day, or maybe you're like, oh crap, I've only got lentils in my cupboard or in some rice and some flour. You've got to use your common sense intuition and figure it out and sort it out, and don't get into the scarcity tactics that are going to play out via mainstream media. Not an accurate representation of reality. Yeah, time's up in your survival skills. I would get going on creating your own garden. I would get to know your neighbors. And I would, if you're not in the survival mode, make sure to just use your discernment with people, and don't get caught up in what other people are experiencing if you're not experiencing it, and use it as an initiation from when use it as an initiation, and use your common sense intuition and think for yourself. And it is sort of like a rite of passage, and that we have to move out of things just being handed to us all the time. And we need to start thinking for ourselves when it comes to food and looking after ourselves in a more self sufficient way, and not being so stingy, or be careful of stingy people. And just if you in the sheep mentality that's going to play out around about those times when this does start kicking in, and that you don't get caught up in it, and you step away, you go home, you use your intuition, and you figure it out, and you relax and hone in and tune in and listen. It's a little bit of a rite of passage and breaking down things, and we have to go through and we have to experience it, and we need to sharpen our intuition and stand on our own 2 feet. And so when things like this happen, it's really the Cosmos being like, hey, you've got this, but you've got to start thinking for yourself, standing on your own 2 feet, being a little bit more self reliant now. We're evolving out of sheep mentality. Let's start tuning in and generating it for ourselves. Okay. Oh my goodness me. Okay, what else have I got? I know that as a group of people, if you resonate with me, um, yes, and fair trade, because the trade isn't really that fair. And it is almost like some of these world leaders are very, very blinded. And it's really important to remember that some of these world leaders have also had past lives and choosing to do war and whatnot. You also have your free will when it comes to these things starting to click in, and how you're going to experience it. You need to get involved in what someone else is experiencing. You can step back, take a break, take a breath, and use your intuition and your free will choice as to how you're going to navigate this instead of getting swept up in collective chaos. So that's an initiation in itself, and self resilience and self reliance, and honing in and listening in. Okay, manifestation, speeding up. Yeah, using creative thinking when you're in a pickle. Okay, I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got this. I've got this food. I've got no food, but I do have this. Let's see what I can do with it. Okay, maybe I might have a few days where we just eat rice. Maybe I might be a little bit hungry, but I'm going to trust in the process and use my intuition and creative thinking and see what I have. I would start backlogging a little bit of food. I would have a little bit. Food shortages are going to be a pretty big one. I would start with that garden, and I would start putting stuff aside now. Like when you go to the supermarket now, just buy a few extra cans and just do it very slowly. If you don't have a lot of money, like do it very, very slowly, and start backlogging food that you can use, and then don't touch it. Almost like having an earthquake safe thing, and just make sure that you've got extras there in for when that stuff does happen. Okay. Yes. And okay, do I need to say anything else about yeah, okay. So I'm going to go into the vaccine a little bit in Wuhan and how it was very staged. Okay, so it was very staged. The consciousness of it was very staged. And the world trade lines will be changing, and it has to break down. And it's like there's two different types of consciousness. There's one that's like, oh, we're already thinking about the future and what the trade lines are going to look like. And there's this other old world masculine consciousness that's like, yeah, but I'm fighting for this because I'm the top dog, but the top dog doesn't have any food, China. So it's not really working anymore, but they're not very aware of that. Okay. Yeah, Wuhan and um it's very staged. It was very played out. I was dreaming of a lot of stuff for a long time, and I was dreaming of some world leaders, and I was dreaming of and how some world leaders like no. So there was something that happened there in a division, where, and it was something to do with Canada and some of the European countries, and this is why South Asia is going to suffer really. And it's time for other countries to thrive now. It's time for other countries to thrive, and it's a breakdown. I was dreaming of a lot about the stuff in the vaccine while it was playing out, and that the vaccine was incredibly hopeless because in China, how the virus was spreading was through the sewers, and you can't control that. And so it was like this, it was spreading through the sewers and everywhere, and you can't control it with a vaccine. And it was just so glorified and so overdone. And so we can go back to that and then apply it to the food shortages and the trade wars that are going to happen now, and be like, okay, is this just something that is made bigger than it actually is? I'm going to step back, step in, tune in, and figure this out. Okay, I think that's all I've got. If you're feeling super overwhelmed with what's playing out, take a break from online media, get back into the garden, and use your common sense intuition about what you're feeling and what you're needing and how you're going to navigate. That's your free will, that's your power of choice. You need to get involved in something that's playing out if it's not benefiting you, and you need to figure yourself out. I think that's so important to focus on yourself and how you're feeling and what your intuition is saying before going to help other people. And I know that sounds a little bit but in these times, it's about self-reliance and self-resilience and using your own intuition. And if someone else is freaking out next to you, but you know that's not the best course of action, step back and focus on yourself and what your intuition is saying, and reclaim back your power a little bit. A lot of us felt very disempowered around the vaccine and what happened, and we can sort of choose not to repeat these cycles and just that I'm just taking a step back and a step out of this now. Okay, what else there? Yeah, I talked about racism, the Holocaust, scapegoating, trade war, sheep mentality. I think that's it. That feels, I didn't want to make this too long. That feels really good. Okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this is going to be helpful for you in the coming few months, in the coming year, next year.